welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Babz, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Griebel loves to make our community tick. He comes around our studio and now on Zoom regularly to tell us what he's up to. And he's up to something interesting right now involving the elections coming up. Griebel, thanks for joining us again today. It's always nice to see you.
Always a pleasure, Paul. Would prefer to see you in the studio, but it's nice to see your face on the screen.
That's right. Where are you now, Oz?
I'm just in my apartment in Hartford.
Okay, so you live in Hartford City itself?
I do.
I didn't know people do that. Is it a good place to live? Like New Haven's a great place to live, but people live in like Hartford didn't shut before coronavirus. It didn't shut down at 6 and everything like that.
No, it's still here. And I'm sure that Mayor Bronin would like to actually give even more emphasis to it. Yeah, we're all alive and kicking, and obviously, keeping people in mind. We're going through a horrific time right now. Those who've lost their lives, people who've lost loved ones. It's a challenging time, and you live it in New Haven with the two hospitals here with Hartford and St. Francis. I mean, they've been doing incredible work in taking care of individuals and whatnot. So yeah, the city is very much engaged.
Good. Well, you're engaged in thinking about how we're going to vote this year during a pandemic, right, but also long term. We talked about this before coronavirus, but obviously some of the issues you're working on now as Griebel have special importance because of people's fears about voting. We're going to get into that. Oz ran for governor as an independent, ran a very good campaign in 2018. He previously sought the Republican nomination. He was a business leader in Hartford. And now he's the Connecticut chair of SAM, not Uncle Sam, the Serve America movement. It's a national group that looking for sort of bipartisan politics at a time, independent politics at a time of polarization. And they support candidates, they run candidates, they push issues. And right now, Oz has a new survey out he's going to ask you to take about how we should conduct our elections going forward in the short term, but the long term. And Oz, I just want to go over the 5 questions with you and ask you about why you're asking them. But I want to start with number 5 because it's relevant to COVID. The question is, Connecticut should adopt a vote by mail option that is secured against potential abuse and fraud for all federal and state elections. Then you ask them strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree, or don't know. What's your goal here? Why you obviously want us to have a vote by mail option in all elections, not just this election. Tell me about that.
Well, I think, thank you for the opportunity, number one, Paul. And on that question on the vote by mail, we had sent a letter into the governor about 2 months ago supporting Secretary Merrill's request that he expand the use of the absentee ballot in what was then the April 28th presidential primary, then moved to June 11th, and now, as you know, June 28th, and now moved out to August 11th. And we're a believer, for all the reasons you just alluded to briefly, that people should not have to choose between protecting their health and exercising their vote. And as you and probably a lot of your listeners know, the way we're one of 6 states, in order to get an absentee ballot, you have to say that you're either out of town or you're sick. And the idea that you might be concerned about something like a pandemic is not adequate to get an absentee ballot. Now, the secretary is going to go and send those ballots out, or send the applications out for the ballots, which I think is the right thing to do. The governor has said that he is supporting that for the August 11th primaries, but not yet for the November 3rd general elections, which I think nobody can predict that he is a lot of supporting that for the August 11th. Excuse me?
I think you had a background on. Did you have the radio on or anything?
No.
It must have been just a Zoom burp.
That could have been my burp. I didn't think I did, but it could have been.
No, it was Zoom. So Oz, 2 issues here.
Right.
So they're saying that they're sending, 3 issues. They're saying that they're going to send us party members because it's August 11th is partisan primary, which is a ridiculous primary except for state legislative races because they already have their nominees picked. It's going to be a day or 2 later convention. But because Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard and Elizabeth Warren and this nutty guy running Republican wouldn't take their names off by law, they can remove it. But I thought they said that for the purpose of this election only, you can say, because they looked at this wording about his or her, you can say that fear of contracting COVID is a legitimate health reason for the August 11th primary, but not to your
The
point.
correct.
In the future, you still have to say there's a health.
Right, and that's why you've got this ping pong ball being batted back and forth across the net between the governor and the legislature, saying that because his executive order, I think, expires at the end of August or mid-September, I forget when it expires, that would not apply to the November 3rd election. But I think the point I really want to make, and instead of babbling on here, Paul, is what we recommended is that there be a commission established. We call it the Voter Participation Commission. And that commission would include legislative leaders, people from the private sector. There's a company in Danbury, for example, that produces the systems and the equipment for a number of states that use, in a more expansive way, the vote by mail option. Bring those folks together and let's have the serious discussion that needs to happen, that needs to occur around issues like fraud, concern about voter fraud and voter abuse, so that we can move forward not just to the November 3rd election, but really put in place a genuine vote by mail option that would be available in going forward in perpetuity for all federal and state elections, as opposed to doing it on a reactive basis every time there's a crisis like this pandemic.
Why do we want vote for mail permanently, Oz?
Two things. One is that it's well, the first reason, Paul, is what we're talking about. It makes sure that people don't have to choose between something like, in the case of the pandemic, their health and exercising their right to vote. To me, that's the primary reason. Secondly, there's some analysis that's been done in states that use it more expansively, where you get some additional voter participation, which I think is a goal that we all want. This is a sacred principle that goes back, to the founding of the country. People have died for this principle. In wars, it's important that people exercise this critical right in determining who's representing us in the state, particularly in the state and federal offices. So those are the two primary reasons, Paul, that are there. And obviously, based on what I've read, there's some cost savings associated with this.
And also, what's interesting is that President Trump said out loud what most of us believe, that this would help Democrats, but all the studies show that even though Wisconsin, it did benefit the most recent election Democrats, over and over again, it does not benefit one party over another.
Everything I read, as you just said, all the academic analysis, all the the people who are involved in elections, you've got 5 states that have essentially a 100% vote by mail approach that doesn't, you get your ballot every year. You don't have to request it. And one of those states is Utah, which is traditionally a very red Republican-leaning state. And I think the Secretary of State in Washington is a Republican. So there are people in both parties that see the
so
value.
Washington State, Utah, and
the
Oregon.
5 states: Colorado, Washington State, Utah. I'm drawing a blank on the other.
It's not Oregon.
Colorado's the one who led this effort in back about earlier part of this decade.
So one question is, why are
Oregon's another one? That's the other one. I'm sorry, Paul.
Yeah, why is it that we're sending the applications rather than the ballots? So in California, which like us said that just for this election, we're going to go to mail in, they're just sending the ballots, because then you got to make this other step of sending in if we're saying anyone could do it, I guess we're still keeping a fiction that it's still, you got to have some reason like health that you're going to cite and take that step. What would be the argument for having an application sent instead of just the ballot?
My understanding, and you have to take this with a huge grain of salt, Paul. My understanding is that that's the way you comply with the Constitution. That our state constitution requires this.
That's right, because we need a constitutional change to go that way. That's been tough. What do you think about that? Should we go the constitutional route? Legislature.
Well, our view on this concept of a commission, Paul, is to put all this on the table. Let's look at what we have to do legally. Let's look at what we have to do to make sure every vote counts, that it's secure and safe, all the things we talked about. Let's talk about the cost associated with doing a vote by mail option, because there is a cost associated with having people go through training to verify signatures on a ballot against the signatures on file. So let's put all this in a bucket and make sure that we can go to the legislature in January with a comprehensive layout. If a constitutional amendment is going to be required, as you know, it requires a supermajority in both chambers. You wouldn't get it on the ballot until 2022. So let's not wait any longer than we have to move this thing forward across the board.
So do you need the governor to do this? The legislature could, Griebel get everyone together and just get a report ready for the legislature.
Well, here's the interesting thing, Paul, and I'll make sure I don't have the link handy, but after this interview, I'll send it to you. In February of 2018, then Governor Malloy issued an executive order asking for a study on expanding voter participation with a specific focus on vote by mail. And nothing really happened on it until the very near the end of his tenure, where his administration engaged something called the Vote by Home Institute, which is based in Denver. And they did a comprehensive, it's a 40-page study, Paul, that lays out all the issues there. In fact, I was embarrassed that I didn't know about it. I called the gentleman who was responsible when he alerted me to this, to say, gee, what's happened with it? To his knowledge, nothing has happened with it. And we need to, so there's already a plan there that can move forward. You know, the fact that Griebel did anything, it wouldn't matter. I think the governor needs to do this. That's why we sent the letter to the governor urging him to form this commission, get people appointed to it, have the Secretary of State lead it, and let's get the right parties at the table. Because if we wait until the legislative session, you know the drill. We'll go through an endless number of committee hearings. It'll get subsumed in all the budget discussions that are going to overwhelm the legislature. So at least let's have some work done in advance while we have the time, and see if we can get this done and put forward so that as we go forward beyond 2022, vote by mail is a genuine option in all state and federal elections.
We're talking to
Oz. One interesting thing, Paul. I think Representative Jim Himes has come out in favor. Is one of the members of the current delegation that's in favor of the vote by mail option.
All right. We're talking to Oz Griebel, who's talking to us about vote for mail and just generally ways to get more people voting and participating in politics. He's the Connecticut chair of the Serve America movement, SAM. He's got a questionnaire out to folks about what they think about some of their priorities about voting by mail and nonpartisan primaries. And he's talking to us on Dateline New Haven, WNHH FM, 103.5 FM live streamed, newhavenindependent.org. The big issue is fraud that people bring up. And, you know, it's funny, we have our almost religious-like views about the way politics works and then the data. We talked about the view that it helps Democrats, which hasn't been borne out. I stick to a near religious belief based on my experiments that is never borne out by the data. I believe the reason I think this is so dangerous is that for 40 years, I've been watching elections in New Haven and they always cheat with absentee ballots. I go in, especially in poor neighborhoods, I go to like someone, hey, you threw an absentee ballot. Did you vote that? They go, I'm not sure. So-and-so, and one people who were running for office came in and just told me I had to sign this. And then they brought it out to the mailbox for me, which is illegal. There were people who were caught on this. We just saw the election in Bridgeport, where a lot of us believe, based on evidence, that the mayor there stole the office based on absentee ballots. But it's not just Democrats. In Connecticut, we look at cities and Democrats, but you look at North Carolina, where a Republican elected congressman lost his seat. They had to redo it because they cheated on absentee ballots. And yet the data shows that it's almost non-existent. The Times claims this morning that only the very closest races would it even be looked at. What's your take on that? I know you say the commission should look at this, but what's your take on it?
I have to say, Paul, up until probably 6 months ago, when I started to wander in this wilderness, I would have been shared very seriously very intensely the concerns you just articulated. They're serious concerns. I don't think you just poo-poo them and say, oh no, we've got systems in place. The whole point of the commission, to me, is to get the facts in front of a group that would be able to opine on them, make sure that both parties are involved, make sure they're professionals both at the Secretary of State's level and in the vendor level that can demonstrate how the system works today. I mean, you pointed out, and this comes up in a number of conversations, the system isn't perfect today. So the idea that you could have a system where ballots are tracked electronically, there are codes associated with your ballot that's different than the code associated with my ballot. You can track the ballot from the time it leaves the secretary's office right until the time it hits the appropriate registrar's area. I mean, there are serious issues here that I don't want to poo-poo. But when you look at 5 states that have done this and have been doing it now, in the case of Colorado, almost 10 years, there is a body of data there that you can look at and come and identify where there are weaknesses. What we might want to do in Connecticut is a little different than what the other 5 states have done.
But it showed it's not a big problem in all 5 states. The word is that it's not a big problem.
Correct. It isn't. That's all five. So the idea of having this in front of, that's my point, Paul, of having a group of people who are serious about elections, about protecting the right to vote, taking a hard look at this so that it could be a clean recommendation going into the governor, going into the legislature about how not only why we should do this, but how we should do it.
All right. And Griebel's talking to us about voting by mail. Denise Merrill always brings up, she's Secretary of State to me. I said, one of the things they do is someone who really could go vote, they sign a form and bring them to the post office form. And she says, just let everybody do it, no excuses. And then there'll be more of a chance they just get it in the mail and then they just pop it right back out. And she's probably right. I just, it is, you get your own personal experiences and you see over and over again how people cheat. And
no, Paul, that's why I think your points are spot on. And both examples that you use, that there have been some allegations in Hartford along the same lines. And so these, you can't just, I don't, and I hope I'm not coming across as saying you just blow them off. I think that's the point of having a in-depth analysis that takes those issues seriously, gets the data from other states, takes a look at where some of the problems we've had here in Bridgeport and New Haven and others is current. I mean, the one thing that your examples identify is the system ain't perfect today.
Right.
So it isn't if you're making a bad situation worse, in my opinion.
So some of the other issues on your survey, Griebel, you have three things about primaries. You'd like to abandon partisan primaries, move to single taxpayer nonpartisan. You'd like ranked choice voting, which, just to put it on the table, I'm a huge fan of ranked choice voting. Maine is using it. I think you get elections where people attack each other less because you need to get the second choice of people who voted for you first, so that if you attack their candidate, you're and that's what we like to believe, that'll happen. It's a little complicated. I wasn't great at math, but you like ranked choice where you pick who you want in order. And then whoever doesn't reach the threshold in the first round, the last one gets eliminated, and that person's votes gets counted in the second round until someone gets 50%. And you want to open primaries to all unaffiliated voters. That last one's interesting to me because 41% of the state is independent. You're saying they should have a choice. Even though I agree with you, can I hit you with some devil's advocate questions on that?
Sure.
One of them is that we need parties to stand for something.
Yep.
And that if you don't want to be in a party, fine. If you don't like the two major parties, you can pick a third party. So you can still pick somebody. You ran as a third party candidate. You actually gave a lot of people a third choice. Why not have parties stand for something, set their own rules, close it to their own people, and then in a general election, let all the parties come forward, including people in our own party? Why should an unaffiliated person get to tell Democrats who would be the best Democratic candidate?
Well, the short and best answer I can give you is because we're paying for it.
Oh, okay.
Taxpayers are paying for those primaries. And when 41% of the people who are paying for them are excluded, doesn't make any sense to us. So we sent a letter back in January to Nancy Wyman in her capacity as chair of the Democratic Party and J.R. Romano in his capacity as chair.
I think we lost you for a second. You froze up for a second, Oz, but I think you're going to come back. This is the era of Zoom. When we're in person, we don't have that issue. But I think you're saying that the short answer is that we pay for party primaries, all of us taxpayers. But 41% of the registered voters in Connecticut are independent, the largest group. And they don't have any say about who's up in November. You're back. Okay.
Okay, I'm back. I think I'm back. Yeah. So you've got the taxpayer issue there, and so we sent that letter in urging them, because the parties can open the primaries. In fact, there was a case in the mid 70s, mid 80s, where it went all the way to the Supreme Court, where the Republican Party then wanted to open its primaries to unaffiliated voters, and were fought back against. I forget who challenged them, but the Supreme Court upheld the right of the parties to determine who's there. But the biggest point most important point I can give you, Paul, is these primaries are paid for by taxpayers. What you articulated a minute ago, the parties can do. They can put out their platforms. They can choose their candidates, as long as taxpayers and exclude unaffiliated voters. Just don't have all of us as taxpayers pay for them.
Okay, and then remember Connecticut, I'm not sure the exact year, Oz, but I believe it was the late 80s. Tom DeMore was the Republican state chairman. Lowell Weicker was U.S. senator. And they tried to open up the primaries, and the Republican Party didn't want it. And they thought that the Republican Party was losing ground. And now we see that the third party, Connecticut, we got independence. They thought they'd get more people in. Democratic and Republican leaders feel like they'd rather have control of the message and the people and the candidates rather than have more people voting. They lost that. Weicker became an independent and ran that governor's race and won as an
Right.
independent. American politics isn't going this way. It is going the more independent route. The politics you're espousing probably represents more Americans than anything, than the Democratic or Republican platforms, because we've gone so independent, especially in Connecticut. But the operation of the parties has not gone to a big tent. The Republicans are kind of doubling down with basically, I would call it the very conservative evangelical white minority that wants to have a very right-wing view of things, rather than in the old days, the Republican Party was pro-environmentalist, big chunks of it, even pro-abortion rights. Yeah.
Right.
But why not just build your third party? Or is it not either or?
Well, I'll just give you a quick example. In New York, Sam ran a gubernatorial ticket in 2018. Stephanie Meyer, the former mayor of Syracuse, and Mike Volpe, who at the time was the chief elected official of a Westchester County town, they earned enough votes under New York law to be a third party. So there is a party that's there. The part about being in the party, Paul, and this is, they say all politics are local. And when you've run for office, I would also say that all politics are personal. So having gone through the experience now twice, the opportunity for an unaffiliated petitioning candidate, third party candidate, whatever word you want to use, is very near impossible if you're starting to go party building. We looked at in 2019, we talked with a lot of people from the SAM organization about organizing a third party in Connecticut. It's almost, you're automatically, Paul, into the ideological arguments. Where are you on this issue? Where are you on that issue? And so what we focused on is the election reform concepts that will give people greater competition among candidates and give voters a real choice at the polls. The number of people who would come up to Monty Frank and me, my running mate in 2018, particularly from Labor Day in, and say, hey, you guys are the best ticket. You've got some great, and these were people besides our parents and our siblings and our children saying, you guys are the best ticket. You've got the best ideas. But if I vote for you, Bob Stefanowski will win. Or if I vote for you, Ned Lamont will win. It's a wasted vote. You're a spoiler. And the ranked choice voting, the term limits, the other things that are on and the open public primaries are a way of really giving voters a legitimate choice. Those 41% of unaffiliated voters, and I would also argue a number of Democrats and Republicans who are not satisfied with the system in terms of the candidates it produces. I mean, really, when you look at the people running, who've run for president, and I have to say, is this the best we can do in this country in terms of what we're offering people as voters? So to me, it's about changing the system rather than trying to form a party, which is why we're hopeful. I'll just put a quick plug in. Our website is joinsamct.org. There are the 5 statements that you just mentioned, Paul. We would welcome people, your listeners and others, to take us to respond very quickly. It takes you about 60 seconds to answer those questions. We would love to know how people feel about our ideas on this thing, on these things.
Jeff Klaus, thanks for listening, folks. Writes in, with vote by mail and increased fraud, activists will continue to vote themselves the treasury. Yes, they cheat. And Eric Mastriano Sr. says, hello, Oz. Thanks for listening, folks. So Oz, you were saying that it's hard to win as a third party candidate. Are you thinking of running again? Is Sam running any candidates this year? Is Oz Griebel eyeing another run for office?
Well, in 2019, Sam endorsed 3 candidates in municipal elections. One of the things that we're doing with this survey, and I appreciate the question, Paul, is we're going to be putting a questionnaire together, very similar to what we're talking about now, for all the candidates running for state Senate and state House this fall, asking them, where do you stand on this? Because I believe we're going to get some people asking for the Sam endorsement. And one of the key criteria for this is, where do you stand on these issues? Because when you're elected, starting the new session in January, we want to know where you stand on this, because these things, Paul, as you know, in Maine, it took 3 legislative cycles to get ranked choice voting in. You got this voter choice 2020 effort going on in Massachusetts for ranked choice voting. These things take time. You just don't go into one legislative session and get the reforms done. So we want to know, are you committed to this? Because we know we're going to need support for the appropriate legislation, and we're going to have to do this over probably multiple election cycles.
How many people are in SAM?
We've got an email base right now in Connecticut of about 1,700, and nationally, all in, we've got a base that's about 15,000 email addresses. It's not a membership organization. It's really about how we're contacting. We're very fortunate, by the way, that a gentleman by the name of David Jolly, who was a two-term congressman from Florida and is an MSNBC analyst, is now come on board as the executive chairman of SAM. We're looking forward to getting him up here later this year to give us the enhanced visibility and for people to listen to his former Republican who's left the party and has been very interested in the kinds of things we're talking about here.
And so are you looking to run for office again?
I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, Paul. We're really focused on these reform issues. To me, those are critical. And you never say never, but I'm a long way from crossing that bridge.
Well, whether you run or not, you're always welcome on WNHH. I love having you on the air, Oz. Love what you're up to. Love letting people know about it. Let's tell people about that website again. Join Sam, JOIN.
Join Sam CT.
Join Sam CT, JOIN SAMCT.org. Nonprofit. Join.
If you go on the homepage, I think it's just you have to scroll down a little bit to get to the survey. You click on it, and the answers will we'd be delighted to hear it. Have your responses, have your listeners' responses, and would be delighted if people would move the survey along to people in your networks. Because the more people,
we'll put that up on the Independent too for our readers, and then maybe you'll come back and tell us the results.
I will look forward to that. I will definitely.
Oz Griebel, Connecticut chairman, Serve America movement. Thanks. Oh, you backing anyone for president this year?
Say that again.
You backing anyone for president this year?
Yeah, backing anyone is tough. These are tough times. I thought it was tough in 16. It's much tougher in 20, in my opinion.
All right. Oz Griebel, thanks so much for coming on board. I also want to thank Harry Drost, the station manager, the miracle man behind the controls that gets us on so many dimensions of social media. They're going to have to invent a fifth dimension. And thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks, Oz Griebel. And we're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wished I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH-FM, New Haven's home.